the Happy Families Podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
Today on the Happy Families Podcast, it's my favourite episode and the last one that we're going to be doing this year. I'm so sad, Kylie. This is the last Doctor's Desk episode.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe we're having this conversation.
So sad. For those of you who have not heard the Doctor's Desk before, it's the best podcast episode we ever do every month. Christmas coming up. We're not going to do one next month. But we kind of have a look at some brand new research and look at how it affects families, what's been going on in the world of parenting science and so forth. Kylie, we have 4 studies to go through. We don't have time for all 4 of them, and I want to spend a lot of time on each of them. We're going to see if we can do each one in like 2.5 to 3 minutes. Never before done. So much to talk about. Where are we starting today?
A study came out of Wellington, New Zealand, discussing the impact of income, household income, on children's behavioural development.
So there's a fair bit of research around the idea that income will have some impact on how kids develop. This study from New Zealand, from Wellington, I don't know if you know what, I shouldn't try to do that because I love going to New Zealand and it sounds like I'm giving Kiwis a hard time. Kiwis give Australians a hard time. I'm okay with that. New Zealand, Wellington University, new study links low incomes. Did I do that well?
No, you didn't. It's terrible. New
study links low incomes, stress parents and child behaviour. And essentially the argument that they make is if we can support parents better financially, then they're probably going to have better outcomes across the board.
Well, income would ultimately suggest education status in most cases.
There's a relationship between education and income, certainly. As one goes up, so too does the other.
And that has to have an impact.
Yeah, here's what they did. Data from more than 6,000 New Zealand mothers and their children in the Growing Up in New Zealand study, which is kind of like the Growing Up in Australia longitudinal study that's been going on. In particular, they looked at children's social and emotional development, examined a core score which reflected their conduct, their hyperactivity, their emotion and peer relationship problems, as reported by the mums. And what they basically say is children with high scores may have problems with areas like friendship, paying attention at school, which could be a forerunner for future mental health problems. So it's really important, the research that they're doing here. They're following kids from pregnancy to 8 years of age. And what they found is that for periods where family income was higher, children had fewer reported behaviour problems than during periods where income was lower. But interestingly, it was only in the preschool years. What the researchers are essentially arguing is that a higher family income does seem to help children's early social and emotional development and head off children's behaviour problems.
Well, I guess the biggest question is why?
Yeah, this one's interesting to me. The argument that they make is, so in relationships, in communication, there's this thing known as serve and return. I say something, I serve, essentially, and then you hear it, and then you return. You ask a question or you engage with me, you interact in some way or another. And this is really crucial for children's brain development. And essentially in their models, what they're suggesting is that when mothers are super stressed, often because of financial stress and so on, and if they're exhibiting parenting behaviours that are related to stress, like yelling and arguing with children, the serve and return isn't happening. So that's affecting brain development, it's affecting behaviour problems, it's affecting cortisol levels, it's affecting adrenaline. And all of this, what they basically say is overall, and this is a direct quote, a higher income appears to lower stress and create space for more engaged parenting, which benefits children's social and emotional development. It's a really fascinating study. It's a really, really important conversation. And I bring it up here. I know a lot of people are probably going to listen and go, yeah, well, that's not going to help me because I'm dealing with a whole lot of financial stress. I don't have sufficient income and my children are behaving in challenging ways. And now you're telling me this is my fault. Number one, I don't earn enough money. And number two, I'm being a lousy parent. That's certainly not what I'm suggesting at all. What I am suggesting, I think what this research points to, is that when we can create at a policy level an economy that supports employment, that supports meaning and purpose, and gives people the opportunity to generate sufficient income to support their families, that we get better outcomes. And unfortunately, in our society today, the cost of living, cost of housing, rent, mortgage, whatever, everything costs so much. Parents are so stressed out. It does have an impact on the quality of relationships and children's outcomes. It's kind of a sad news story, but it's a really important study, and I think one that needs ongoing attention.
Our second study is out of the University of Wollongong.
Oh, my alma mater. That's where do we say alma mater? I think we do. Even in Australia, we talk about alma mater. Yeah, great university.
Where they looked at 3 and 4 year olds and they looked specifically at their sedentary behaviour, physical activity and sleep, and the percentage that these kids are getting out of each of those areas.
Yeah. How many of the kids are actually meeting the World Health Organization guidelines for physical activity, sedentary behavior and sleep? 33 countries. Big study, really, really clever work that they've done here. They had 7,017 children who participated in this. And here are the guidelines, okay? The proportion of children who meet the World Health Organization guidelines for physical activity, which is supposed to be greater than 180 minutes a day of total physical activity and greater than 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous intensity in their physical activity. Screen time, they're saying less than an hour a day because we're looking at 3-year-olds. And sleep duration, 10 to 13 hours a day. So they've estimated that across countries and by World Bank income group and geographical region using big meta-analyses. And Kylie, would you imagine that across the globe that most 3 and 4-year-olds are getting enough sleep, are moving their bodies enough and are essentially not sedentary too much?
I want to say yes, but I actually don't think so.
Yeah, you'd probably be right.
Yeah, and the challenge I have with it, and it actually saddens me so much when I think of the average 3 or 4-year-old. These are busy kids.
Well, they're supposed to be, yeah.
They're busy kids. They're so inquisitive. They're so curious. And when they're not boxed in, you actually kind of can't stop them from moving, because that's what their development stage is.
Let me ask you, if you were to guess, you haven't seen the study, you don't know what's about to come out of my mouth. If you were to guess what percentage of kids are meeting those guidelines, that is, moving their bodies 180 minutes a day or more with at least 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous intensity in their physical activity, less than an hour of screen time and 10 to 13 hours of sleep, what percentage of kids across those 33 countries would you imagine are ticking those 3 boxes?
Oh gosh, I have no idea, but I would suggest that's probably 25% or less, I think.
Damn, that's pretty close. It was 14%.
Yeah.
14% of kids.
I was hopeful. That's why I went that high.
Right. Well, so curiously, there was no clear pattern according to income group. The proportion meeting the guidelines was 16.6% in low and lower middle income countries, 11.9% in upper middle income countries, which is not good. I mean, only 11%, and 14.4% in high-income countries. The region with the highest proportion meeting the guidelines was Africa, while the lowest proportion, North and South America. I find this fascinating. I guess the conclusion for this one really is that most 3 and 4-year-olds in this analysis are not meeting the guidelines for physical activity, for sleep, and for sedentary behaviour. And as families, these are things that really matter for healthy lives.
And the interesting thing, just the correlation, if our children are using their bodies more, they're going to sleep better across the board. I feel like our children's, I don't know if spirit's the right word, but I feel like it's just being crushed.
The world is not designed for kids,
No.
And we're seeing that increasingly. Kylie, we have 2 studies left.
Okay, impact of school phone bans on children's behaviour while at school.
I'm so excited about this one. So as you know, last year or the year before, I was in conjunction with Rebecca Sparrow, Madonna King and a handful of other people, we petitioned Grace, the Education Minister at the time in Queensland, to bring the ban in and align Queensland with what was going on in other schools. There's been a brand new article written in the Daily Telegraph by Elid Sproul-Mellis, who says 1 year on, the statewide ban on mobile phones in schools has been near universally hailed as a success, with almost 90% of principals claiming it has reduced classroom distractions. Let me read on. The statewide ban on mobile phones in schools has been near universally hailed as a success by almost 1,000 school leaders 1 year on, and principals say they're relieved to be, quote, protecting a whole generation of children from screen addiction and distraction. In a survey of 968 primary and high school principals conducted by the Department of Education in New South Wales, 95% said that they supported the mobile phone ban at their school. Asked about the impact on students, 87% of the 204 secondary school principals surveyed said the ban had reduced classroom distractions, and 68% reported it was, quote, a lot better. One more thing that I'll add here, Kylie, social interactions between students have also improved. 86% of principals highlighted that was the case, and more than half said student learning at their school was, quote, a lot better post-ban. Overall, 4 and 5 noticed improvements, while only 19% reported no change, a worsening, or declined to respond. I mean, this is a good news story. Support for the phone ban when we were talking about bringing it in Queensland was not exactly high, and the government was really pushing against it and agitating and saying, no, community consultation, we don't need to do it. And I was dogmatic. I was adamant that this was necessary, and I feel vindicated. I feel like I knew what I was talking about. Maybe sometimes the experts do know what's going on. That's my one.
I find this one interesting because you've got 95% of parents who supported it.
Oh, yeah.
Yet, is this a case of parents not wanting to be the bad guy? Because as a parent, I can just say to my kid, you can't take your phone to school.
It's really, really easy when you can say to your children, guess what, kiddo, it's against the law, so you can't drive even though you're 15 or 16 and you've got your L's, but you can't drive on your own. It's really easy to say it's the law that X has to happen or Y has to happen. And kids will, sometimes they'll be upset about it, but they generally comply. They get it. It's the law. And so by bringing this ban in, now it's futile to argue against it. There's no point arguing because it's the law. It's the rule. The ban is in place, and this is just how we do things here. It changes the culture. I think overall it's a good thing, regardless of the challenge that you raise. And we know that parents absolutely are struggling with it and want to do better, but sometimes they just feel so helpless. I think this is a good news story, and it's great to see some research coming out that supports something that we've been agitating for a long time. Great news.
Well, our last study looked at whether or not smacking kids harms child development. Can I just say I'm struggling to understand why in 2025 we're still having this conversation?
Well, we're not quite at 2025 yet. That's still a few weeks away. I'm going to give credit to our Happy Families audience, and I'm going to ask for patience as I explain this study because it is really important. I know the researcher who's done the study personally. He's from the University of Oklahoma. His name's Bob Lazarlier, and he's been researching this for decades. The research appeared in Marriage and Family Review, which is a well-regarded journal, and it's called Resolving the Contradictory Conclusions from 3 Reviews of Controlled Longitudinal Studies of Physical Punishment, a meta-analysis. Now, this is a big one, and meta-analyses matter. This is actually quite an important study. For years now, I have said that I fundamentally and completely reject the idea that smacking is a useful disciplinary strategy for kids. And I do that because it's shorthand. It's also popular, and because I do believe it. I believe that there are better ways to discipline kids. But in my emails with Bob and in my conversations with him over the years, there's been a couple of things that have really struck me. I mean, see what I did there? Really struck me. We're talking about smacking. I'm so sorry. I'll move on. You didn't even respond. Just rolled your eyes. My goodness. He's argued that smacking should only have a limited place in parenting. And he's also argued that it's not as bad as everyone makes it out to be. And I think that the average Australian parent, that's an argument that I hear all the time as well. It's just a little tap. Now, I've got really strong moral and philosophical reasons for arguing against smacking. No one ever smacks and says, oh, look at me nailing parenting. But what Bob has always argued is that there's a dose response. The more you do it, the worse the outcomes. But if you only do it a little bit, if it's measured, and if it's at the right age, his argument is it's okay. And he's been saying this for a long time. His evidence says this. They've found that smacking kids explains less than 1% of changes in child outcomes. But he's very clear on what smacking is acceptable and what smacking is not acceptable. And I cringe as I say this because for the last 20 years, I have actively discouraged smacking, and I've actively said it's just not okay in any circumstances. But I want to be fair to what the data highlights here, and I'm hoping other people can deal with me cringing as I say it. The study recommends that if spanking is used, the most effective approach is 2 open-handed swats on the bottom for children aged 2 to 6 when they don't respond to milder discipline. Now, again, I'm cringing as I say this because I don't think that we should be smacking our kids. I don't think that it's necessary. I think that we have far better ways of doing it. But I also know that some parents are at their wits' end. And you and I both, if we're completely honest, know that over the years, unfortunately, from time to time, we've used methods that we don't always agree with because we've been at our wits' end and we just needed a solution. For example,
I also don't use that as a justification. And I think this really kind of is stretching my capacity as far as the research goes, because like you highlighted earlier, I don't think any parent gives themselves a pat on the back after an experience like that.
No, they give themselves a kick in the bum.
Yeah. The times where that has been a part of my parenting toolkit has been when I've been at my lowest, when I'm struggling as a parent. I'm not sitting there going, this is the only option. In that moment, there isn't any other options, but I'm not thinking that.
Right. And I'm always going to advocate for alternative methods. I'm sharing this in the doctor's desk because this is a scientific discussion. That's what this podcast is for. I don't disagree with the data. I disagree with the morality and the philosophy.
And again,
does that make sense?
Yes. And because the other part of me is that the parents who would say to you, I've just given them a swat and I haven't lost control. I've done this completely intentionally.
In cold blood. Right. I can't help but be moral about it.
If you have the capacity to make a decision about hitting your child with clarity, it's not a reactive response.
It's not a dysregulated thing.
Yeah. Then you clearly have the capacity to think of another option.
Okay. So we could talk about that for a while. Because this is doctor's desk, I just want to talk about what the science showed because I think it's fair to the science. Here's what he says. He says he wanted to discover what disciplinary responses are more effective than smacking so that we can recommend them to replace smacking. His response to that, by the way, is that there are none, although parents should prefer milder and verbal disciplinary responses as much as possible. I've got this thing called the 3 E's, works really well. And he and I have talked about it, and he does like my 3 E's, but he keeps going back to this. By the way, he and Diana Borman have done a lot of studies together. And as you know, I'm not a huge fan of Diana Borman. And he says also, although it is clear that spanking is correlated with adverse outcomes like delinquency, does it cause those outcomes or not? And what his answer is, smacking does not cause harmful outcomes unless it's used too often or too severely or out of meanness than out of concern for children's welfare. Now, I know you and I are both going to have a response to that, but I don't want to get caught up in the response. I just want to report the study. Essentially, longitudinal data, meta-analyses.
I'm biting my tongue.
I know, me too, even as I read it. This is a really hard one to report on, but this is a doctor's desk and I am a scientist and the science fascinates me, even if I morally disagree with what it's found. Meta-analysis, 12.5, nearly 13,000 participants across 47 studies, kids ranging from 18 months through to 11 years. Researchers focus on 4 key child outcomes: externalizing problems, where kids are aggressive and defiant; internalizing problems like anxiety and depression; cognitive performance; and social competence. After controlling for baseline behaviour, the researchers found that smacking explained less than 1% of the variation in child outcomes. Essentially, what they're basically saying is that smacking has a minimal impact on externalising problems, internalising problems, cognitive performance, and social competence. The results fundamentally indicate that previous reports of the harmful effects of smacking may have been overstated due to residual confounding, meaning that other unmeasured factors may have influenced the negative outcomes rather than the smacking itself. It could also be that people are measuring smacking that is beyond the two-handed swat with 2 to 6-year-olds. There's any number of reasons that he's got these findings. I'm concerned about it. I think that there's some selective choices that have been made in terms of the studies that are included in the meta-analysis. I'm also concerned about it because I think that it gives people a green light for smacking. I'm concerned about it for a whole lot of other reasons that you and I have sort of already touched on. But I also need to highlight one other thing, and that is that these findings are in line with a study that was published in Child Development, which is one of the biggest and most important journals that are out there in this field, in 2021, which did find that occasional mild spanking had minimal negative effects on child behaviour. So there it is, Kylie. Doctor's desk, kind of feeling on a downer. Really important to highlight. In spite of this research, obviously, smacking can and does cause significant harm. It can be misused. It is likely to have harmful effects if it is misused, and if it's done too frequently, or if it's done because that's what we've always done and we allow ourselves to think that it's okay and we get in the habit of it, that's when we start to get negative outcomes. I hate the study. I hate the research. I hate that it's there, but we've got a couple of studies in the last couple of years that have been very, very, very well done by well-respected researchers that are suggesting that if you're getting it wrong, don't forgive the pun. Don't beat yourself up about it. But please remember there are better ways to do it. And I've written several books about it. And I'm not sharing this Doctor's Desk episode or this particular study to vindicate or justify the hitting of children. I find it reprehensible. I still reject its usefulness. And I still argue that there are better things out there. If there's any good to come out of this particular one, it's that if you have given your kid a swat because you have been dysregulated and you're so over it, you just don't know what to do, the good news is it's probably not going to have any detrimental effects long term, so long as you don't keep doing it, so long as you do find better ways.
Well, if you were trying to encourage me to enjoy this episode better, you didn't do a very good job of it. I still don't like Doctor's Desk, and especially after today's data.
You know what? I still find it fascinating. I mean, the science of it is amazing. I could sit down and do
Yeah, but here's the conversation piece. We could talk about this for ages, but you find what you're looking for.
Yeah, you do. You do.
And if you want to justify smacking, then you're going to find data to support that.
Yeah. So let's pretend that I didn't do that one. And we'll wrap things up by saying that the Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Ruller for Bridge Media. It's so funny. If you'd like more information about how to not smack your kids and actually love them and raise them in wonderful ways that help them to be disciplined and do really well without the punitive stuff and without going down the Bob Lasley path, nice guy that he is, you can visit us at happyfamilies.com.au. I'm going to say, just grab my book, The Parenting Revolution. It's got everything you need. Like, it's so darn helpful. Parenting Revolution, wherever you get your books, and you can pretend that we didn't just talk about that. Focus on the other 3 studies.